This morning I want for us to hear another testimony, a little bit different testimony from a fellow who some of us know, Bobby Clark. And Dave wasn't sure who Bobby was, and I said, well, he's the former NHL player. And he says, oh, really? And I said, yeah. He says, no kidding. He says, well, how did you get a hold of him? And I said, well, he used to attend here. He says, really, I had him going for a while, and he really thought he was former NHL player, but no, Bobby Clark isn't. Bobby Clark isn't an NHL player, but I think Bobby plays hockey. Bobby owns a body shop down in Guelph, Guelph Auto Body. I've had my car fixed down there, and does great work. But God really has moved in Bobby's life over the last several years. I'm going to ask Bobby if he'll just come. I've asked him to just come for an interview this morning. And the reason why I asked him is because the other day, Mary Ellen handed me this magazine from Promise Keepers. And Bobby's been going to Promise Keepers for quite a few years now. And I opened it up, and there's an article in here with a picture of Bobby and how God's used him with Promise Keepers over the last few years and how he's had an influence, as a guy who owns a body shop. And so I wanted to just have Bobby talk with us here this morning and share with us how God has worked in his life. When did you start? When did you first come to the Lord?
I won't be able to give you enough of the story here today, but I was a real piece of work, and you wouldn't want any part of me and your family, your extended family. Never my wildest dreams. I always sat in the back of this church, and I wanted to come back someday and just thank you guys for mentoring me as a church as I sat and slipped in here and rushed out at the end of the service. I was born and raised in Guelph. I got 4 sisters. I got a brother, mom and dad, and by all accounts, we looked like we had a pretty average, normal family. We weren't a church-attending family by any means, just that average family. But anyway, I had a traumatic event happen to me when I was 15 years old, and I call it traumatic because I know that all of us have had traumatic events. And I deal with all the homeless people in Guelph now, all the at-risk youth in Guelph, and I get to sit in their traumatic events now with the heart God has created within me to embrace them. But my father drove me to a hockey game I was playing as a goaltender for the juvenile select team when I was 15 years old, and he drove me to a hockey game in Elmira to play that night. And anyway, we went home that night. On the way up to the rink that night, my father asked me, Bobby, what are you going to do with your life? You're going to play hockey? Is that what you want to do? And I remember I didn't even answer him. Didn't respond to him. I was just so excited about getting up to the rink that night, getting on the ice, being with my team. Anyway, little did I know how I knew he was drunk that night driving as he drove up, and I don't remember my dad being a drinker, but he was drunk that night. And we go home that night and we went to bed, and I got up the next day and went to high school, and I never saw my dad again. We don't know where he is on planet Earth. Anyway, that started the events of me not being able to trust people and commit to people. And I pretty well went crazy till I was 40 years old. From 15 to 40, I was just a crazy individual. But anyway, that just started a chain of tragedies in my life. As a young person, my mom couldn't handle me. A year later, I was 16 years old. I was the biggest drug dealer in Guelph, Ontario. I sold drugs. I had franchised in every high school in Guelph. I pretty well took out all my peers, a generation of people in Guelph through that time. And little did I know the RCMP were onto me big time through the older guys I was getting the drugs from to bring into the high schools. And when I even talk with this story now, it just devastates me that this amount of suicide I was amongst in drug overdoses and what I was presenting to people. I've carried a lot of guilt and shame for a lot of years. And anyway, the RCMP come in and they tore down my locker at school, and they did a simulcast in my bedroom at home. And I didn't realize at the time my mom and my oldest sister were in on it with them, that they just didn't know how to confront it. And they just cooperated fully with the RCMP, and they took me down. But anyway, the drug culture ended for me, but I became an alcoholic for the next 20 years. Trying to cope, not having my dad, not understanding where my dad went. When my dad left, he had 2 son-in-laws, and his second grandchild was born that week. And anyway, that just started off my journey in life. And my first high school girlfriend, I remember at Christmas time, I found out that she had two boyfriends in high school. She gave us both the same matching shirts at Christmas time that year. I was a 16-year-old. That started off a chain of events of me abusing relationships, of manipulating girlfriends and potentially living with girls on 2-year cycles, and not being able to trust or commit.
You started coming here back, it was maybe around 11, 12 years ago, and I didn't realize how you had come to the Lord not too long prior to that.
Well, my youngest sister married a believer, a guy that loved Jesus, and I wasn't aware of that, and I didn't care anyway. There was something about him. He dated my sister. She was unsaved. She got saved while they were dating. I didn't care. I didn't understand it. Didn't matter to me. And anyway, my brother-in-law took on the assignment of God to witness to me. And he witnessed to me for 17 years without a word. It was just through action. And I was a piece of work. They had children. They had their first son, Joshua, and then they had their daughter, Laura. And my brother-in-law always throw the line to me to, come to a Paul Henderson breakfast or something or whatever, and I wouldn't touch anything. I would just reject him, and years of that. And then anyway, he invited me to come to a Christian hockey tournament up in Orangeville to play. I was playing out then, and God would set it up that I would win the MVP of that Jesus Christian tournament with all these church guys. And by then I had no self-esteem. I didn't have low self-esteem. I just had no self-esteem. I felt like such a loser. And I look back and how God orchestrated that tournament that weekend. That I scored the winning goal of the championship game or whatever, and I was just numb though. I was just going through a numbness of life, not understanding anything. I didn't even care about myself anymore. Just the heaviness of my dad leaving and not understanding. There was a silence in our family. Nobody talked about it. My aunt and uncles or nobody. It was just this huge silence. But anyway, God orchestrated. I look back, He was pursuing me all the time, but He cranked it up on me. In August of '97, my little niece Laura, she's 8 years old, started randomly phoning me at my business. I was a very important person. I was self-employed and owning a body shop, and she would interrupt my day and just phone me and start evangelizing to me over the phone with words. And I remember the one time she just said to me, "Uncle Bob, if you died right now, you're going to go to hell." But it didn't bother me. It just didn't. And then the one time she was weeping on the phone and just saying, "Uncle Bobby, you need Jesus." And I just thought it was all a joke, and I'd mock her. I'd just say something like, I remember saying to her, "I just saw Jesus at the Stone Road Mall yesterday," and in her little childlike face, she'd say, "Really?" And so I remember these pointed little conversations, even though they're so many years ago. But the one time she phoned me in August of that month, and she was crying. She was just weeping, and I found out that my brother-in-law and sister weren't even aware of her phoning me. And she was 8 years old, and she was just, God had laid me on her heart, and she was just following through. And anyway, at the end of August, she stopped phoning me, and I was so happy. I was just so happy that she was so annoying. And anyway, God set me up in April '98. I got sick, and I was a guy who was playing golf and working 12 hours a day and playing hockey and going to the gym and just playing the part and coming up here to the beach and having Sea-Doos and just having all the toys of the world. And I got sick in April '98, and I was sick for 8 months. And at the same time I was sick, I was visiting a guy on my hockey team in Guelph that was diagnosed with brain cancer. And every Sunday I'd go visit him in the afternoon down there in Guelph, and he was married with 2 young kids. And everybody else on my hockey team said, "I don't know how you go visit him," because nobody else was going to visit him. And I didn't know how I was going to visit him either, but God, I look back, was drawing me to confront me. I wasn't a believer. I remember as Doug would come to the door in those visits. In the one visit, I actually, believe it was the last stupid thing God allowed me to do on planet Earth. I brought him a homemade pornography video of a video that was stolen out of a Hollywood actress's home in California, came underground to Guelph, Ontario, into my hands. I duplicated.